All right, good evening. Hope you're doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Sanhedrin Daf Samech Beis, and we're starting at the two dots on Samech Aleph on the Beis, about 10, 12 lines from the bottom. Yesterday, at the end of the day, we learned about a machlokes amoraim. If a person was oved avodas kochav me'av u'me'ira, let's say it's a social pressure. I don't believe in your deity. I just believe in you. You and I are friends. I feel bad saying no to you. You're going to do some weird avodah zarah, but because of our good friendship, I ava or yira or I fear you, one of the two, but not because I have any theological, thinking about this particular thing. So that was a machlokas amoraim, and Abaye said you're still chayiv. So what we're going to do for the first part of the day is analyze the shita of Abaye. And says the Gemara, the siman is avad yishtachave and lemashiach. Let's see how these three different approaches may play out as to why it is that Abaye held you'd be chayiv, even though philosophically you're in the clear. You don't care one drop about this rock that he's davening to, but it's Avamiyura. So says the Gemara of Amar Abaye Minola. Abaye says, where would I be able to tell you that you're still chayiv if you are oved avodas kochavim me'avo miyira? Says the Gemara, that's not. Look at the language in our Mishnah. Ha'oved avodas kochavim echad oved v'chule. La'ilav echad oved me'ava u'miyira. Maybe we can make a gentle diuk from our Mishnah that whether it's this or whether it's that, and the profile of that type of answer allows us to make the diuk that even if a person's going to be oved me'ava or miyira, afal pi, that it's not philosophical or theological. So maybe he should still be chayiv misa. Says the Gemara, that's how we know, according to Abaye, that you're chayiv misa. Rava says you're pater in such a case. If a person is just going to worship an avodah zarah because their friends want them to, so Rava says you're pater. Amar lach lo, that's not actually the diuk to make from the resha. Instead, what diuk should be made from the resha? The one that we learned yesterday, Kidamataritz of Yirmiyah, that the first part of the Mishnah is talking about Kedarka, and the second part of the Mishnah of Echad Zoveach and Echad Mekater and all of that, Echad Menaseh, all of that was Lo Kedarka. That was Rav Yirmiyah's answer. So all of that was approach number one. If you look at the acronym, at the mnemonic that they had, this was Avad. It's Oved Avodas Kochav, I'm quoting our Mishnah. Amar Abaye, this is approach number two as to how we know that Abaye is of the opinion that afal pi, that you're only doing the avodah zarah me'avu miyira, that you're still chayiv misa. Amar Abaye mina amina lo detanya lo sishtachabe lahem iyato mishtachabe aval ato mishtachabe la'adam kamoscha. That you're going to still be held accountable for that. That you're doing it to show kavod. So yachol afilu ne'evad kehaman. What if we're serving someone like Haman? See, unlike regular people, where someone is we might be trying to worship something, but avodah zarah applied to Haman because Haman feigned himself to be a deity. So it says the Gemara Talmud Lomar lo savdem I Haman miyira hava nabod. People weren't serving Haman because they thought he was a deity. He's no different than you or I are. In fact, that was the Gemara at the very top line of this page. It says Ma'ishna ihu minan didan. Oh, he's flesh and blood. I'm flesh and blood. He's not a god. Okay, you want me to bow down to him? Okay, but that's me'avo miyira. Says the Gemara. Therefore, what we see is that a person will be held accountable. That it's aser based on Shteit and Chumash v'lo sa'ovdein, that a person is not allowed to bow down to a deity like Haman. We therefore see that even me'avo miyira, you're going to be chayev. So says the Gemara. That's how Abaye knows that you're going to be held accountable when you are oved avodas kochav me'avo miyira. And the Rava says 6 lines from the bottom, Ki Haman velo kahaman. There are things that are similar to Haman, and there are things that are not similar to Haman. Haman, what do we know about Haman? That he feigned himself to be a deity, as did many people. But velo kahaman, the ilu Haman miyira, vehacha lav miyira. Really, Haman was miyira, but when the pasuk was talking about losa of dame, you misunderstood Abaye. Abaye thought that the pasuk of Elosa of Dame would teach us the Isser of someone like Haman Kamash Malan. That no, the pasuk's talking about Lav Miyira. That's talking about regular Avodah Zarah. But if you did bow down to Haman and it wasn't with anything other than Avar Yira, you'd be pater. So this, looking at our mnemonic, is we did Avad was the raya for Abaye from Oved Avodas Kochavim. Or the second one was Yishtachave, which was the case of Haman. And now we're going to do our third one, which says the Mashiach, and that's 5 lines from the bottom of the page on Samach Aleph and the Beis. And the Gemara says, "Amar Abaye mino aminullah." How do I know? Says Abaye. Third possible proof. How do I know that a person who serves on avodah zarah me'av meira that they're going to be chayiv? So says Abaye, the Tanya, Kohen Mashiach. That's a reference to a Kohen Gadol. Be'avodas kochavim. That's not good. If your Kohen Gadol is serving idols, you're in a bad circumstance. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Omer, it has to be b'shigigas ma'isa that they made an error. However, v'chachamim omrim that the only time we could ever have a case of a Kohen Mashiach ba'avodas kochavim is behelim davar, where he paskins incorrectly. Remember, we've learned in Shas a couple dozen times over the years that there's a type of korban called par he'elim davar shel tzibur. That's when the Sanhedrin, or when a dayan, when a Kohen Gadol makes a psak and he's wrong, so he paskined, he thought he was right. It wasn't an accident in regards to the result. He said the wrong thing. He just made a toast. Says the Gemara that's the machlokas Rebbe, who said that the case of Kohen Mashiach b'avodas kochavim is b'shigigas ma'isa, where there was a shigaga. He inadvertently served an avodah zarah, and we'll discuss what that means soon. And the Chachamim said, no, it wasn't where the guy inadvertently served. He made a psak. It says the Gemara, V'shavin, both Rebbe and the Chachamim agree, b'se'ira ki yachid, that the korban he brings is like a se'ir v'yachid. V'shavin she'ein maybe asham telav, and he doesn't bring an asham telav. I asked the Gemara, how does one inadvertently serve an idol? I think that's a great question. How do you accidentally do that? You thought it was a regular Orthodox shul. You went inside and you prostrated yourself in front of the Aron Kodesh, and it turns out that it really was a Beis Avodas Kochavim, Harei Libo L'Shamayim. What were you thinking about when you were mishtachavim? The Eibishter, the proper Eibishter, no deities. So therefore, you're good to go. So therefore that can't be it, because that would not be a case where there would be any korbanos brought. That's not the Isser Deoraisa of serving an idol. So what was the case of the Kohen Gadol where Rebbe said it was b'shigigas ma'isa? Let's say a person saw an andarta. An andarta is a statue of a king of some kind. You could take a look at Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom. Rashi says, Dibra maschel ela, shera dmus, shahir regilan lasos b'dmus ha-melech. So there's a statue of the king, so a Caesar, whatever the case may be, and someone bows down to that. So back in the Gemara, bottom line, if you say this really is my Mezidhu, Pashat, that's Mezid, that's a peso, it's representative of the king, you're bowing down to it. If it's on purpose, you're Chayiv Misa, nothing to talk about. And top of Samach Beis and Aleph, below Kibla Belo, then Lo Klumi. And if you don't care, then your bowing down really isn't anything. You're just a little curtsy. That doesn't, it's probably not mutter, but it's not chayiv misa. Elolav says Abaye, what must this case may be? The case of Rebbe of Shigigas Maisa, where you are chayiv, so says the Gemara, that's me avo miyira. And afal pi that it was me Shigigas Maisa, that's how he defines Shigigas Maisa, which is that I'm doing this action not because I theologically believe that this piece of rock is a god, but I'm doing this action because of social pressure, whatever the case may be. So then the Gemara says, that's me'ava meira. Rava, how would Rava respond to Abaye? Abaye with his third attempt over here. Rava amar lach lo. That's not what's going on. We're talking about the Omer Mutter. Says the Gemara, what does that mean? Omer Mutter, hainu ha'elam davar. If someone were to say that it's mutter, isn't that the same thing as ha'elam davar, where someone paskind that it's mutter? Well, it sounds exactly the same to me. So says the Gemara, no. There's a difference between Omer Mutter and Ha'elam Davar. And the Gemara makes this distinction on Samach Beis Amud Aleph, 4 lines down. The Omer Mutter legamre. When a person says Omer Mutter, he did so with no qualifications, with no asterisks. It is absolutely mutter to do this action. And he was wrong. But Ha'elam Davar, when a person paskins, so a Ha'elam Davar is never a blanket heter. It's always nuance. Kiyum mixas ubitul mixas. Ha'elam Davar requires that you say, well, this aspect is going to be asur, but this aspect is mutter. That's a case of Ha'elam Davar. But just saying that something is completely mutter l'chora is a different case. That is Omer mutter. And that's why Rava is able to reject this. All of this was the 3 attempts of Abaye to try and show that, in fact, in a case of Oved avodas kochave me'ava miyira, that if a person is going to serve an idol because of love or fear of a friend, whatever the case may be, that in such cases you're still going to be chayiv. And Rava argues in all three cases. And lemaisa, we paskin like Rava, that if a person serves avodah zara me'ava miyira, even though it's aser, it's probably an aser daraisa, but you're pater mimisa. Says the Gemara 5-6 lines down on Samach Beis Medal Tani Reb Zakai, Kamei de Reb Yochanan, Ziveach v'kiter v'nisech v'ishtacha v'behalamechad eno chai v'lachas. Oh, this is going to be subject to a lot of discussion. So we have this shita of Reb Zakai, and he said it in front of Reb Yochanan. What did he say to Reb Yochanan? That if a person, an individual, does various different types of avodah zara worships, he either slaughters or he shechts, he cooks, he spices, he pours water or wine, and then he bows, and he did it all behelam echad. He did it all in one fell swoop. So it says the Gemara, Eino chai v'la achas. That's all considered to be one. Amar le, Rav Yochanan says, please get out of my base medrash. Poke tani levra. Go teach your stuff outside. Go take your wares elsewhere. Nobody's interested in what you are saying. That's how Rav Yochanan reacted. But Amar Rabbi Abba, Hada Amar Reb Zakai, Machlokes Reb Yosef Reb Nosson. Perhaps we should say that whether or not a person behelam achas does multiple different services to an avodah zara, perhaps, says the Gemara, that that's a machlokes Reb Yosef Reb Nosson from a famous place. The next few lines are easy, but we've learned it a dozen times in Shas. You can see a whole host of Mar Mekomos in the side here. That's in this Masech on Daf Lamed Hey, in Shabbos Daf Ayin, Yevamos Daf Vav, and on Daf Lamed Gimel, and in Krisos, and other places as well. What is this? This is the unique pasuk of Havara. The pasuk says, "Lo sevaru eish b'chol moshvosechem b'yom haShabbos." Most of the 39 malachos of Shabbos are not listed anywhere in Chumash, but there is a pasuk that speaks about Lo sevaru eish. So why did the Torah go out of its way to articulate one of the 39 malachos? So the Gemara says that's a machlokes Tanoim. Havara lelav yatsa, David Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi held that the reason why Havara was articulated and specifically mentioned in Chumash was to teach you that it's different than the other 38. We know there are 39 malachos, one of them is Havara, but this one's different in that it has a lesser punishment. There's no chiyuv skila, and rather there's only a lav. However, Reb Nosson omer lechalek yatsa. Oh, whole different ballgame. Reb Nosson was of the opinion that the reason why the Torah individually brought out the Isra of Havara was to teach us that when a person does various Isurim on Shabbos, he's chayiv al kol achas ve'achas. Now let's try to connect it back to our sugya. We know that by Havara, some say it's lelav yatzas and some say it's lechalik. And we know that by Avodah Zarah, that Reb Zakai was of the opinion that it's behelam echas, you're only chayiv one. So it says the Gemara 12 lines down, 10 lines down. According to the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, that the reason why the Torah distinctly mentioned Havara was to teach us that it's only a lav and not skila. Ishtachava nami lelav yatsa. That perhaps we would say that bowing down is also going to be for a lav and not for anything broader. However, Lamad Amar Havar Lechalek Yatsa, that according to the Shita that says, that's the Shita of Reb Nosson, that Havara is to teach us that when we do multiple Isurim Bevas Achas, that they are going to be different punishments, different korbanos. Hishtachava Nami Lechalek Yatsa. So the Gemara wants to posit a question against Rav Yochanan. Somebody presented to Rav Yochanan that if you're mizabech and you're mekater and you're menasech, you're mishtachave, all these different actions by avodah zarah, you did in behelam achas, so he said you're only chayav one. So the Gemara and Rav Yochanan rejected that. Pok tani libra. So the Gemara says, why is Rav Yochanan being so stark? Maybe it's a machlokes that's similar to havar lelav yatzas and havar lechalek yatzas, that some people hold that there is a comparison to be made between the world of Havara and the world of Ishtachava, that some hold that it's Behelam Achas and some hold that it's not. Why was Rav Yochanan so categorical to say that it has to be Lechalik, that it has to be, that Avodah Zarah doesn't have the same din as Shabbos? So says the Gemara, last of the short lines, Maskef Rav Yosef, Dilmad Kan Lo Kamar Rav Yossi Hasam Havar Lelav Yatsa, that perhaps Rav Yossi, when it came to Hilchos Shabbos, where he said that Havar is Lelav Yatsa, Maybe that was only the nafka lechiluk malachos me'achas mehina, because based on another pasuk, perhaps he learned, Rabbi Yossi, that we are lechalek. Titania. Where do we see this? Very same name, Rabbi Yossi Omer, second of the wide lines, 1/3 of the way down. It says, "Ve'asa me'achas mehena." The pasuk says, and you may do one of these. So it says the Gemara, "Pa'amim shechayv achas al kulam, pa'amim shechayv al kol achas ve'achas." There are times in halacha by Hilchos Shabbos that sometimes you're chayiv one korban for many actions, and there are times that you are chayiv many korbanos for one action, or many korbanos for many actions. V'amar Reb Yonasan, and in fact on the side of the Gemara it corrects this and says V'amar Reb Yossi bar Chanina, my taima de Reb Yossi. Why does Reb Yossi hold this way? And the Gemara gives a very nuanced drasha. Tichsiv ve'asa me'achas mehena. And what we're going to pick up on here is not just achas and hena, but me'achas and mehena. So look at the 4 layers of drasha on this one set of words. Achas, me'achas. One says, it could have said achas, and then we added a mem. Hena and mehena. And there's a difference between the word hena and with a mem in the beginning. And then it's achas, shehi mehena. There are times when you do one actions and you have a lot of consequences. Vehena, there are times that you do a lot of consequences, shehi achas. And we're going to go through all 4 iterations, all 4 aspects of the drasha, halfway down. When it says achas, that teaches me that Shimon, what does it mean, Shimon? It means that if I write the full name of Shimon, I violate the Isra of Kosei. What does me achas teach me? From that one thing, says the Gemara, shame mishimon. Once I write the letters of Shin Mem Mishimon, I've written 2 letters, I've communicated something, I've written a name, it's also the word Sham, and that you're going to be chayav on also. What does it mean when it says Hena? That's avos. We know famously from the Gemara, early in Maseches Shabbos, that there are avos malacha, and mehena is toldos. So we know what those 2 words mean. What are the last 2 parts of the unique drasha on ve'asa me'achas mehena? That when it says achas shehi hena, that we have one action, one he'elam davar where you're going to be chayiv a lot. That's zadon Shabbos v'shigigas malacha. Zadon Shabbos means I know that it's Shabbos, I just don't care. And shigigas malachos says I didn't know what kind of actions I was doing. And lastly, hine heina shehi achas, that a case where a person does a lot of actions and you're chayiv one, that's the reverse. Not when you had a zadon Shabbos. You had shigigas Shabbos. You thought it was Tuesday. You were pashut. You had no idea what day it was. Dugma, persons, just imagine in Gaza they had no idea what day it was, or maybe they did. I'd imagine for some they had no clue what day of the week it was. Shigigas Shabbos v'zadon malachos. So says the Gemara that the drush over there is that by Shigigas Shabbos and Zadon Malachos, so there you're only going to be chayiv one. But all of that, says the Bryce, says in regards to Hilchos Shabbos Abal Hacha, in our case with the line of Rav Zakkai from the beginning where he says that all of the actions that one does by Avodah Zara, Behelam Echad Eino Chayiv Ela Achas, the Lo Nafka Lechiluk Malachos Miduch Tachrisi, the Kule Alma Ishtachav Ala Chalak Yatza. No, the din of Hilchos Shabbos is totally unrelatable to the din of Hilchos Avodah Zarah. You may well have psukim that indicate that there is sometimes by Hilchos Shabbos there's lechalek. Sometimes you have to say it's all behalam achas aser. By Avodah Zarah there are no mar makomos like that, and that's why Rav Yochanan held stark. Pok tani levra. You're saying something wrong, Rav Zakkai. The drashas that we have by Hilchos Shabbos indicate to us that yes, there's more nuance by Hilchos Shabbos, that sometimes you do a helam achas. Behelam achas, you're allowed of a very only chayiv one thing. That's not true when it comes to Avodah Zarah. That's why he held stark. So says the Gemara, okay, let's try another line of questioning. We're just about 2/3 of the way down the page, about 8 lines into the wide lines. Okay. But chiluk malachos de avodas kochavim nami tepul kle me'achas mehena. Maybe we should learn the psukim of me'achas and mehena, just like we would by avodah zara. We should do the same thing by avodah zara that we did by Hilchos Shabbos. Achas is zvicha. Maybe when we say achas, okay, the classical way to do avodah zara is to do a shchita on an animal. Me'achas is siman echad. But a me'achas, that drasha teaches us even if I only cut one of the 2 simanim, the windpipe or the esophagus, not both, so you didn't do a proper shchita, but if you only did one of the simanim, you'd still be chayiv. Heina teaches me avo, zivuach teaches us kiter nisuch v'ishtachava. So this also is another layer where Heina teaches me the larger category, the major ticket items of what you would do for an avodah zarah, which is shechting, and kitur is smoking or burning, and nisuch is adding wine, vishtachava is bowing. And what does mehena teach us? Not the avos of avodah zarah, but the toldos. Shavar makil lefana, you do small things. You break a twig in front of it for its sake, even though that's not the classical way to serve it. And the next part of how, in theory, we could have learned this pasuk for the sake of showing that avodah zarah is similar to Shabbos is achas shehi heina. That's zadon avodas kochavim v'shegigas avodos. That a person is intentionally trying to do avodah zarah, they just have no idea what actions they're doing. That's avodah. That's shegigas avodos. And lastly is heina shehi achas. What are the many actions that are treated as one? That's shigigas avodas kochavim v'zadon avodos. There, if you accidentally are serving avodah zarah, but you did the actions on purpose, so that should be like Shabbos. So back to our question against Rabbi Yochanan. If we take the pasuk of me'achas mehina and we darshan that pasuk by avodah zarah the same way that we darshaned it by Hilchos Shabbos, so then we'd have a case scenario where we could understand why Rav Zakkai on the top of the page was right, that if a person does a lot of actions, but they do so b'shigigas avodah zarah, that they should only be chayav one korban. So then again, why was Rav Yochanan stark to say poktani livra? Go get out of the base medrash. Nobody wants to hear your Torah. So says the Gemara, in order to answer this, we need to figure out what was this last case of heina shehi achas. Remember, the heina shehi achas aspect of the drasha would say that a person did a lot of malachos, a lot of avodos, I should say, for avodah zarah, and we want to only have one korban. So it says the Gemara, Hai shigigas avodas kochavim hechidami. And we've seen this line of questioning already. How are you doing this Isser b'shogeg? I thought it was a shul. I was wrong. It's a beis avodah zarah. You're putter on that. You thought it was a shul. Your heart was in the right place. Let's say that I saw Caesar's statue and I bowed down to it, Rahman al-Itzlan. So there, Kibla ale mezidu. If I accept upon myself that that's a deity, you're 100% right. But I'm chayiv misa. That's not shigigas avodas kochavim. And ilo kibla ale lo klum. If you don't, then it's not good. You shouldn't do it. But it's not avodah zarah. You don't think it's a deity. So says the Gemara, Ella, what then is in fact the case of shigigas avodas kochavim? Ella, says the Gemara, and maybe the option is that it's me'avo me'yira, and we're tying together our sugya now from what we learned earlier. That maybe perhaps we're talking about a case of shigigas avodas kochavim that's talking about me'avo me'yira. I'm not serving this avodas kochavim because I think that theologically it is a deity. I'm doing it because I'm friends with you and I feel the social pressure to do so. So says the Gemara, that only works according to some of the Amorim. According to Abaye, we could fathom such a response, that in the final part of the drasha of Me'achas Mehena, when we were trying to apply that pasuk to the world of Avodah Zarah, and say that when it says Heina Shehi Achas, that it's Shigigas Avodas Kochavim V'Zadon Avodos, and you're only chayiv one korban, that might well be good and true according to Abaye. Elul Rava Damar Potter, Ma'ikal Amemar, but that doesn't work according to Rava, because Rava says that you're Potter in that case, which means that it's not what Rav Zakkai said. Ella, says the Gemara, that perhaps you're right. Perhaps according to Rava at least, that when the last part of the drasha said Heina Shehi Achas, and that's Shigigas Avodas Kochavim, what was that talking about? That's Be'omer Mutter. Ella Be'omer Mutter. Says the Gemara, 4 or 5 lines from the bottom. That must be what the case is, where I just thought it was completely mutter what I was doing. I didn't realize it was asr. So says the Gemara, if you want to say that, then we have another problem. If the answer of Omer Mutter works for you, that's what Heina Shehi Achas is, then Tifshot, we should have been able to answer a question that we otherwise didn't answer before. Because Omer Mutter sounds a lot like the next case. Debamine Rava me Rav Nachman. He'elam zevazeh biyado mahu. Let's say a person has a double shogeg. It was a shogeg that I was doing Avodah Zarah in the first place. And when I did the actions that looked like Avodah Zarah, those were also a shogeg. So maybe that's the final case. But if you want to say that the case of Shigigas Avodas Kochavim V'Zadon Avodos was talking about Omer Mutter, well, then we should have had an answer to this case that we didn't have earlier. Says the Gemara, Tifsho, we should have answered, De'eno chayav ela achas. We should have said that you're only chayav achas. That's what the drasha would have indicated. If the fourth aspect of the drasha of Hena, Shi achas, was talking about Omer Mutter, and that brisa indicates that there's only one chiyuv, just like Rav Zakkai said, then that's what we should have assumed in this case as well. So says the Gemara, that's not a star kasha. Hello kasha. But Tifsho, make that conclusion. I don't mind at all. Even if you want to make that conclusion, you still can't say that the pasuk of me'achas mehena, the asa me'achas mehena, is talking about avodas kochavim. Why? De'ilu hacha, when we're talking about our pasuk of me'achas mehena, Ksi b'Mashiach par, that pasuk was talking about bringing a par if the Kohen Mashiach makes a mistake. Uvenasi seir, and if the king makes a mistake, then he brings a seir. Uveyachid kispa v'seira, and if a yachid makes a mistake like a chatas, he has to bring a female sheep or goat. But v'ilu be'avodas kochavim, the korbanos don't match. The korbanos in that pasuk of asa me'achas mehena are either a par, a sa'ir, or a kifsa, or a seira. But by avodas kochavim, the korban that we bring is only one of those. Tanya, we have a brisa of shavin shebeseir kiyachid v'sulomidi. So the Gemara now explains why it is that Rav Yochanan holds stark pok tani livra, because really you tried valiantly, I might add, you tried to say that the pasuk of asa me'achas mehena was relatable back to the world of avodas kochavim. That just like by Shabbos, we have scenarios where the helam echad, a person does a lot of melachos and he'd be only chayav one. We tried, based on the pasuk of asam achas mehena, with a lot of nuance, to bring that to the world of avodah zarah. Kamash malan, that it doesn't work, because when it comes to the world of Shabbos, there are different korbanos. We have par, we have seir, we have kivsa, and seira. But by avodas kochavim we don't, and therefore the pasuk of ve'asa me'achas mehena is not shaykh by the world of avodas kochavim. Kamash malan, that Rav Yochanan was right in pushing back against Rav Zakkai, and therefore, in conclusion, whereas Rav Zakkai wanted to say that if behelam echad, a person did the various different aspects of avodas kochavim, Rav Zakkai thought it was only chayav achas. Kamash malan, no. Rav Yochanan says, get out of the base medrash. We don't hold that way, because you can't learn from Hilchos Shabbos back to avodas kochavim, because the pasuk you're trying to use is not shaykh by the world of avodas kochavim. That brings us to the last line of Samach Beis Amud Aleph. Yasser Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, when Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda showed up on the scene, Omar, he said, turning to the top of Samach Beis Amud Beis, Hachitana Kameh, no. Rav Zakkai didn't say the line that we've just been analyzing. Rav Zakkai didn't say that if a person behelam echad did a lot of different avodos for avodas kochavim, that you're eno chayav ela achas. Take a look at Rashi here. Hachitana Kameh Rav Zakkai Kameh Rav Yochanan. What did he say? He said a very cryptic line. Take a look at this top line of Samach Beis Amud Beis. Chomer b'Shabbos mishar mitzvos. There's a stringency by the laws of Shabbos that doesn't apply to other mitzvos. And chomer b'shar mitzvos mi b'Shabbos. And there's something stringent about areas of halacha outside of Shabbos as it's compared to the halachos of Shabbos. Let's pick this apart. Chomer b'Shabbos. What's unique about Shabbos? Shabbos asa shtayim behelam echad. Chayav al kol achas ve'achas. Ma she'en ken b'shar mitzvos. That's a general rule. If on Shabbos a person does two averos behelam echad, so we'll have to see what this means. But if I do two isurei malacha in one lapse of judgment, so then I'm going to be chayav on each one. And that's not true by other mitzvos. And then the second part of Rav Zakkai's line was Chomer b'shar mitzvos. There's a stringency by non-Shabbos halachos sheb'shar mitzvos shogag b'lo miskaven chayiv. That when it comes to other mitzvos, if you do a shogeg, you bring a korban. However, Masha'in came b'Shabbos, because we know that by Hilchos Shabbos we have a din of Maleches Machshavas Amar Rachmana, Maleches Machshavas Asra Torah, as we'll see at the bottom of the page. Now let's pick apart this brisa. It's really not a brisa, because Rav Zakkai, maybe it was, yeah, it was a brisa, that Rav Zakkai quoted a brisa in front of Rav Yochanan. So this was the brisa he brought. So Amar Mar, let's analyze 6-7 lines down. Chomer b'Shabbos she'Shabbos asa shtayim. We said that there's a stringency by Shabbos, that a person who on Shabbos does two malachos is going to be chayav for each of those malachos. So the Gemara says as follows: Hechidami. If you want to say that what the person did was that they did ktsira, they did harvesting and they did grinding, and what would that be equivalent to in shar mitzvos? If a person ate chelev and if a person ate dam, two separate isurim, that's not a difference between Shabbos and shar mitzvos. Why not? Because 8 lines down on Samach Beis Amud Beis, those are the same. So Rav Zakkai's brisa can't be talking about where I do two separate isurim, let's say ktsir and tchina, and on the other hand I do chelev and dam. Maybe we're talking about shar mitzvos where you're only chayav one hechidami. Oh, this is a whole different ballgame. Let's say that I was eating some chelev that wasn't kosher, and then I ate another thing of chelev. I'm not doing two different isurim. I'm doing one isur. And by Shabbos it would be the equivalent of where I do ktsira twice in one halam. So it says the Gemara, again, we don't see the distinction that Rav Zakkai is bringing in the brisa, that there's a difference between Shabbos and Sha'ar mitzvos. So it says the Gemara, that's exactly why he said to Rav Zakkai, get out of the base medrash. Your brisa is miraf sinigra. You have nothing to stand on. Goodbye. Get rid of your brisa. Says the Gemara, why would Rav Yochanan react that way? Or about a quarter, a third of the way down on Samach Beis Amud Beis. My kushya. Why is Rav Yochanan holding so stark to kick him out of the base medrash? Maybe it's taka the case, like we initially suggested, that when we said that there's a chomer b'Shabbos b'shar mitzvos, that's when two different malachos were done. Masha'en came b'shar mitzvos means asal na'avodas kochavim k'der Rav Ami, that perhaps according to this brisa, that what that means is that when it comes to avodas kochavim, we hold like Rav Ami, that Rav Ami holds that when we're zivech v'kiter v'nisech belim echad enu chel v'chayv ala achas. Maybe the Reisha is talking about Shabbos as it relates to two different malachos, ktsir u'tchina, and maybe the Seifa is talking about the din of Rav Ami, which Rav Yochanan anyways didn't agree with, because, as we saw on the previous page, because he didn't agree with version number 1 of Rav Zakkai, which was this same idea as Rav Ami. Says the Gemara, Lo matuk mala be'avodas kochavim. We are not able to establish the brisa that Rav Zakkai brought on the top of this page. We are not able to establish it as avodas kochavim. Why not? The Ketani Seifa, because what's the end of that brisa? The brisa says, Chomer b'shar mitzvos. What's the stringency of non-Shabbos mitzvos, of other halachos? B'shar mitzvos, shagag b'lo miskabin chayiv. But shagag b'lo miskabin avodas kochavim mechidami. By so many mitzvos, we have a din of shagag b'lo miskabin chayiv. But by avodas kochavim, we said shagag b'lo miskabin. What would that case be? Hechidami idika savar. We're going to see this again because every time we say that there's a shogeg by avodas kochavim, we have to pick it apart. I thought it was a shul. I was wrong. It was a beis avodah zara. So that's putter. My heart was in the right place. Really, I saw a statue of Caesar and Rahman al-Islam bowed down. And so then that depends also, right? If I thought that Caesar was the god, then that's avodah zara mamish, and I'd be chayiv. That's not shogeg. That's not shogeg either. That's a zero. Oh, so it says the Gemara, Elame Avo Meira. Perhaps the shogeg is talking about where I'm doing this not because I believe that that's a deity, but instead because of Avayira. And then, of course, the anticipated question that only works according to Abaye. What's the case of shogeg? So it says the Gemara 3/4 of the way down, and we'll stop at the last line on the page of Mir Tashem. Omer Mutter. We must be talking about a case of Omer Mutter. And that's our case of shogeg below miskaven. I really thought it was mutter when I was doing it. I really thought so. Masha'en kain b'Shabbos the pater legamre. That where I thought something on Shabbos was omer mutter, I might still have some major issues. That's my shogeg in regards to the din of avodah zara. That's my shogeg below miskaven that I'm still chayv. But by Shabbos I would be pater legamre. Why can't we say that? Ad kan lo ba minei Rava me Rav Nachman he'elam zeh v'zeh. When was Rava asking his question from Rav Nachman that we saw in the previous Amud? That's only when we had the double shogeg. Remember our case of double shogeg. Shogeg that I was a shigaga by avodas kochavim, and all the actions that I did were shogeg as well. That was whether or not you're chayav one or two. But pater legamre leka lemando amar. There is no mando amar that you're pater entirely. So that can't be the seifa of the brisa. So the Gemara says, wait, my kushya. I have another kasha that might still support Rav Zakkai. Maybe the beginning of the brisa wasn't talking about Shabbos; it's talking about avodas kochav. B'sefer b'shar mitzvos. The shogag below miskavein. What's the case of doing a shogeg without intent? That case would be the kasavar roku uvelao. A person had a liquid in their mouth; they thought it was saliva, but actually turned out to be chaylev. I don't know how it happened, but that's what ended up happening. Mashein came b'Shabbos de potter. So says the Gemara, by Shabbos you'd be pater in such a case. Let's say that on Shabbos I pick up what I thought was detached grains from the ground. I picked up some grass. Forget Hilchos Muktzah. I set it aside for Shabbos to feed my animals, whatever it is. I set it aside. So the Gemara says that there you're pater. When a person makes an accident, when a person is misasek, they do an action, but there's hana in the accidental action, you're still going to be held accountable. That's like by chaylev, the food tastes good. You eat chazer by accident, you still have halachic accountability. You do an act of arayos, even though you thought that for whatever reason it's mutter, but there was hana, so it's aser. However, misasek b'Shabbos pater meleches machshavas asra Torah. Oh, so here we have a real answer, and perhaps Rav Zakkai is right. Says the Gemara, Rav Zakkai is not right. Rav Yochanan the time, why did Rav Yochanan reject this? To lomokim masnisa reisha b'chad time of a sefer b'chad time. Wherever Rav Yochanan can avoid it. He doesn't like the Gemara Zukimta, where the reisha and sefer are talking about different cases. He's not a fan. Rav Yochanan, man de metargem li chabis ali b'dechad tana. If there is a person who could explain to me, and this is a Gemara we saw in Bava Metzia, this particular case of chavis, which we're not going to get into now, please explain it to me according to one Tana. Stop giving me the ratio according to one person in the Seif according to another. Rav Yochanan wasn't having it. The only way to understand the brisa that Rav Zakkai presented was by saying that the ratio is talking about one case and the Seif is another. Rav Yochanan was a one-focused Jew. He didn't want the ratio and Seif talking about different things, and therefore he said, anyone who can explain the case of Chavis Haliva Dechad Tana, Movilna Mane Basre Lebe Masusa. I'll carry all your clothes for you to the bathhouse. So that's why he rejected Rav Zakkai. Rav Zakkai wanted to say the brisa on the top of the page that we have since modified, where the ratio was avodas kochavim and the seifa was shar mitzvos. But Rav Yochanan wasn't having it because he wanted it all to be one theme throughout the brisa. That's why he rejected him. That's why he said, get out of the base medrash, poke tani livra. We'll stop right here at the very last word on the page of Samach Beis and Beis, and Emir Hashem pick up tomorrow with Daf Samach Gimel. Wishing you all a beautiful night.